Guitarist Laurence Juber is one of my oldest friends. We met in 1975 when I had just got my degree from Berklee College of Music. He was 23 and the hottest studio guitarist in London. I was 24 starting out, and I'd met a colleague and friend for life. Having absolutely loved his deep musicianship and innovative guitar playing for a long, long time, I wrote a guitar piece for him last year called Guitar Piece. He kindly recorded it for me, and I thought it would be a nice treat for all those guitar players out there to hear how one of the world's finest instrumentalists approaches a new piece, especially this guitar piece. Now tell me about this guitar intimately.
This is an L5 that came out of the Gibson factory in 1933.
Wow.
It was clearly started in 1929 because it's got the dot fingerboard.
Dots, yeah.
The label says Gibson Mandolin Guitar Company, which they switched over to. They dropped the mandolin around 1931. The Gibson.
Yes, I love that.
The scroll at the end of the fingerboard, that's all kind of earlier features. But then the pickguard is a full-length one, which would date it early 30s rather than 29.
Yeah, although that pickguard could always have been replaced, I guess.
I don't think it was.
No? Okay.
If it were to have been replaced, there would be underneath, there would be a screw hole because the shorter pick guards terminated about there.
Right.
But the factory order number and the serial number are both 1933.
Right. Okay. Great. Yeah.
And I got it for, I traded 3 guitars and a check.
And a check, yes.
And a check, yeah.
Very nice. Well, I'm glad you whipped that out.
Yeah, I used it on a gig the other day, which was, we were doing a whole bunch of like 20s, 30s style stuff. So
nice.
It was good.
Yeah, there it is. Nice. Well, Radio Richard, of course, is overjoyed to have you back in the chair. Some may call it a hot seat, but in your case, it's just a kind of a warm, squishy seat.
It's actually a stool.
A stool, right. Well, the less said about that, the better. So today we're here to talk about this guitar piece that I wrote for you, and you were kind enough to actually play it. And I want to ask you a bunch of questions about it.
Go ahead.
And then I want you to ask me a bunch of questions about it, like, why are you torturing me? But
I kind of got used to that a long time ago, Rich.
Yes, I know. I started torturing you in 1975.
Yes.
So, and that was the
And I
beginning.
still have the scars to prove it.
Yes, yes. Well, I
I'm
never.
still discovering stuff we did together that I wasn't aware had been, hits, like the thing we did with that Exile project,
Oh,
the
yes, yes. Colin Blunstone.
Colin Blunstone, yeah, which turned out to be like a massive hit in Indonesia.
Yes, yes, and other places actually. And I was. It's kind of an interesting story about how that happened because I was in America at that year, but I was. Of course, people will always be amused. I went to America thinking I was going to be working, but I wasn't. And so I kept getting called back to work in England. And so these guys who I had worked with, songwriters, a guy called Steve Coe, said, "Look, we're doing this big record and we've got Colin Blunstone singing." I said, "Oh my God, I love his voice so much. And he's one of my favorite singers." And they said, "Yeah, we got this tune. And what do you think?" And I said, "I know just how to do this. We'll do it with guitar intimately, and it'll be Laurence Juber." And they said, "Wow, good. Okay, let's do it." And so that's how that happened. And it's, I mean, it's a really beautiful record. And yeah, all of Asia loved that record, and I think some other countries too. So it was great.
Yeah. But I ran into Colin a couple of years ago, which is where I learned about how successful it had been.
Yeah.
You just, when you do session work, you don't always know.
No, you never know what it's going to be, and I mean, sometimes you get you're doing a record for one artist, and it comes out with another artist.
That's true.
I'm sure that's happened, and you never know who you're going to meet.
The funniest one for me was reading, there used to be a magazine called Musician,
Right.
and I was reading this interview with Alan Parsons, and he was talking about Tales of Mystery and Imagination, the first Alan Parsons record. And then he mentioned that I played on it. And it was like, I did?
Did I?
Because my name wasn't on the credits of the album when it came out.
Huh.
But then it turned out that a session at Abbey Road 2 on a Tuesday night with a string orchestra and some mandolins and Francis Monkman playing harpsichord.
Oh, great. Yeah, man, he was great.
That was for that album. And, but, David Katz would call with a session and he didn't always tell you what it was.
Yeah, absolutely. So for all the guitar players out there, I thought it would be great to hear from you about, number one, what you do when you approach any new piece. I mean, the thing is, you've played classical music, you've played the lute. I mean, what would induce a very handsome young man from Enfield to pick up a lute?
Southgate, actually. Southgate.
Oh, Southfield. Oh, sorry. Wasn't Enfield?
No, Enfield's down the street.
Oh, is it? Oh, sorry.
No, Southgate was.
Southgate. Okay.
Because my ambition was to be a studio guitar player, but my motivation was to study music because I was doing all right, kind of, mostly self-taught, but, with some classical guitar lessons because I had to be able to get like grade 8 to get into college.
Right.
On classical guitar. The lute was kind of, I got kind of very interested in Renaissance music. And because the roots of fingerstyle guitar are really in that era, there's no fundamental difference between playing fingerstyle on a 6-string guitar and on a 19-course lute. If you really want to be authentic, you put your thumb in the inside to pick rather than on the outside.
Ah.
Mostly because in the Renaissance, the bass lines were not important in the way that they became in the Baroque.
Right.
In terms of being the harmonic anchor.
Indeed.
So a lot of Renaissance stuff was much more linear. And it just, and it was also a way of getting extra credit. And I ended up, once in a while I'd get booked on, when I got to LA, I'd get booked on sessions on lute. I played on the soundtrack of Ladyhawke.
Must have come in handy there.
Yeah, I mean, you know, and periodically somebody will want to know if I can play lute at a wedding or something, because I'm in the union book, you know, playing lute. But it's
Really?
really,
Yeah.
at this point, it'll be, you know, just for really the odd thing. I mean, and it takes so long to tune, and it
Oh,
needs
yes.
frets, and that's a whole
Right.
other.
So let's talk a little bit about how you begin to approach any new piece, regardless of whether it's mine or Uncle Tom Cobley. What's the first thing you do when you look at a new piece?
First thing I do is put the kettle on.
Right. Priorities right.
Now, I think the first thing is, I mean, and there's a difference between, I mean, you know, with guitar piece, which you sent to me, what you write is very guitaristic. So I didn't have to, it's not the same thing as like, I mean, for example, I've got on my music stand, I've got Skylark,
Right.
which is in E flat on
Yes.
the, you know, in the real book version.
Yes.
And so my first thought is going to be, okay, what register is this going to speak best in?
Right.
Which means, you know, what key,
Right.
what tuning, perhaps. Is it standard tuning? Is it DAG-GAD? Is it CG-D-G-A-D? Or, you know, what's the ultimate purpose? How much improvisation am I going to be putting into this? What's the texture? There's a lot of imponderables there. And sometimes it just takes trial and error just to figure out kind of what's going to work and what doesn't.
Right.
And, you know, a lot depends on the melodic range as to whether, I mean, if it's like something in E,
Yes.
you know, it's fine, but as soon as you get, you know, as soon as you're past the octave point,
Yeah,
you're already
exactly.
into, you know, you're already into violin territory there.
Indeed.
And that, and then, you know, do I have accessibility of bass notes if I'm going to be high up the neck?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a function of key. It's a function of the texture. It's
Mm.
there's you know, it's stuff like that. With Skylark, I mean, it's in E flat. So, you know, when I did a quick arrangement of it, I just thought, well, okay, I'll just shift it up a half step.
Nice.
But then that puts the melody pretty low.
Yes.
You know, but I kind of like it in that register. You know, it's
Beautiful.
very
Yeah. Great.
kind of rich down
Rich. Yes.
there. And so I wouldn't think about changing the key on that. With guitar piece, the first thing I did was, you know, look at it and think, okay, well, you know, how am I going to, because you didn't give me any fingering. You gave me some indications as to where you wanted things ringing out.
Yeah, I threw in what I could in terms of positions where I thought it would be easy or
Right.
but none, you know, you're Laurence Juber and I'm not, so I just assume you're going to think of something better.
Well, I mean, for example, here, I could have fingered, I mean, there's only really one way to finger the C sharp minor 7.
Yes.
And which is, you know, which is lovely there. And
Yeah,
then,
with the
but
open
with the
string.
F sharp minor 11s, you know, to get
Nice.
that open B ringing,
Yes.
and you've got a, you know, you've got a phrase mark underneath to kind of keep it, you know, remind me that it should all be connected.
Indeed.
Because I could have done,
Yeah. But it's not as,
for me, it's
yeah,
just
that,
richer.
indeed.
And then here, and you do
Perfect.
indicate you want the B open.
Yes.
But then here on the C sharp minor, now I could do this on the G7
Yes.
coming out of it.
Yeah.
And so, but what's cool is to use the open string there for
Yes. Very nice.
and that puts me back on that F sharp minor
Yeah.
11.
And with the C sharp minor, of course, you could also use the open E string. And
I did that the second time.
You did it the second time. I was just going to say, yeah, which was
Yeah.
great. Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah. what it was. Oh, that one.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean,
Thank God
so
for that.
that and like with the where you've got this,
Yes.
you know, that's pretty. I mean, there's no room for an open string there,
Right. No.
other than the bottom A.
Yeah.
I love that G sharp over an
Yeah. It's always.
A. It's kind of Bacharach does stuff like
Yeah.
that.
It in a way it is. Yes.
Yeah. And then, you know, pretty much, I mean, mostly everything else in this is, you know, there's only really one place to put this stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
now, but this was a tricky bit
You're not kidding.
because to do, you know, you've indicated it as a G sharp minor, but you've got an F sharp and a D sharp. So
Right.
the essence of the triad is missing, right? But,
Yes.
but the problem here is that the next phrase, I need to be up there.
Yes,
so
you do.
I figured it like this
Wow.
with the second and sixth string,
Wow.
because then I was in the right place. But the hardest thing in this whole arrangement is keeping that E ringing.
Yes. Yes.
But then the next phrase, you do a harmonic.
Nice.
Also, because
Yes.
it's molto ral, I can kind of play, you know,
Oh,
again,
yeah.
it's expression can make a difference as to how something gets fingered.
Oh, hell yes.
Because-
Absolutely.
and now the question, you know, the big question then coming into in measure 17 is whether I could finger it like that, but I
Nice.
chose because it keeps me.
Yeah, that's right. That's yes.
And then here, of course, the E has to be open.
Yes.
And then here,
Nice.
this was tricky.
Yeah.
Mostly because I have arthritis in my left thumb.
Ah.
And holding down bar chords like that, especially when the fingerboard doesn't really have much of an arch to it. You know, on an electric guitar, that would be a lot easier.
Yeah.
So it just takes a bit more pressure.
Right. Right. Which.
But as guitar pieces go, I mean, this was pretty much self-explanatory.
Yes. Yes. Well, the other aspect of it you touched on, which I think is really important for certainly younger players to think about, is the word melody. Now, I've known some wonderful musicians in my life. I've been very fortunate to know some wonderful musicians. But the key to being a wonderful musician is an understanding of what melody actually is. And so many great guitar players who are actually technically really good, I don't think get it. And you, from the very first moment that I met you, there's something about the way that you understand music, which is a singing quality of understanding melody. My father, I remember, said to you in many times, you know, you really understand the big notes and how to
He
play.
said, yeah, that was the best piece of advice. Was he said, play big notes.
Yes.
Make the melody notes meaningful. So I always try and make the melody sing. You know, and whether that's on acoustic or if I'm playing, you know, if I've got a nice sustaining lead blues rock guitar sound, is to make that sing, to really bring out the voice.
I'd be interested to know when you started out, how that sort of got into your consciousness of understanding what a melody is, that it goes from one place, it rises to the big notes, and it comes down and says, okay, I've said that. What do you think of that? And that's really what melodies do. And
That's
but you
true.
understood that from the beginning. What kind of music did you even listen to as a beginner to think,
Well,
yeah, that's got it?
I think one very important lesson, and you can blame Bert Weedon for this, because I learned out of Play in a Day,
Right.
Bert Weedon's book. And in the back of the book was When the Saints Go Marching In. And one rainy afternoon, I sat there and I saw, okay, that's a C and that's there. And I just, I followed the melody.
Right.
I I don't know where the kind of the innate sensibility comes from. I think I think more than a kind of a talent for playing guitar, because from my perspective, I still think that I fake it. And it takes it always took me a lot of practice, and it wasn't, you see kids on YouTube, 9-year-old kids who can pick up a guitar and just shred like maniacs.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
never had that skill. That was something that just came out of a lot of practice. But I
Yes.
think that hearing a melody and understanding the shape of it, I think was, I don't know where it came from. I mean, my dad was a big fan of big bands.
Right. Right.
But we didn't listen to a lot of music in the house. I mean, other than the radio.
Yes.
The Billy Cotton Band Show on the BBC or Two-Way Family Favorites or stuff like that. So I heard a lot of different kinds of music when I was
Yes.
growing
Well, that's very obvious. But I mean, in a way, when I love your Renaissance album, and when you play those melodies, I see absolutely no difference from when you play your own tunes. I see the same attitude towards melody.
I think it's the same attitude towards music.
Mm.
And I remember I used to work with a session guitarist in London named Kevin Peake, who was a very fine classical guitar player as well as being a studio guy, and ended up working in Sky with John.
Right.
And I remember, while I sitting down and I was playing something classical, and he leaned over and said, there's no difference between playing classical music and playing anything else.
Right.
And that's really been kind of a guiding philosophy for me, is that it's all music. You go back and you think about, in the Baroque era, I mean, when you see a concert of Baroque music where there's a harpsichord, and that's the continuo instrument, it's wrong. It's not the way they did it.
Right.
Like you had, I think it was for every 4 violins, you'd had another continuo instrument. I mean, that era had a rhythm section. They didn't have, they didn't have a drum kit, but they had, lutes or arch lutes, theorbos, guitar, whatever. And when you hear Baroque music played with somebody strumming, and you realize that it all fits together perfectly well.
Absolutely.
And the fact that that era had its own swing, too. In France, what they called notes inégales, where those, and how much of it was swung by kind of jazz standards versus, some more academic, dotted kind of feel. We'll never know,
Yes.
because nobody left any records from that era.
Yeah. By the way, I've always thought that the dotted notation of jazz or swinging music was very inaccurate, and it led a lot of classical players to have a kind of a jumpy attitude towards the way that they would try to play swung eighth notes, but it was never right. It's somewhere between a triplet and something else.
There's a great Phil Seaman quote about West Side Story.
Oh yeah, I love that. Go ahead.
Yeah, trying to make that show swing is like trying to tow the Queen Mary through a sea of Mars bars.
Love that. Absolutely love it, and it's so true. And I found that a lot with of course, writing the kind of stuff that I write for strings. It wasn't until I met Gavin Wright and his section that they understood how to actually really play swing eighths notes in a swinging jazz way. And that was largely because of Gavin, and he understood that music, and so that was a big thing. The thing that I'd like to know now, first of all, I'd like to know how you approach writing a new piece for a specific, because you've written so many different styles of pieces, and your pieces always have an intent, and which is what I love about them. They always have an attitude. The form is always great. But how do you approach when you have to write a guitar piece for a specific purpose?
As to whether I'm being commissioned to write something, or whether I'm doing it because I need another track for an album,
right?
Or for some other purpose. About 20 years ago, I got asked to write an hour's worth of music for guitar and string quartet for Disney Sea in Tokyo. So if you ever go to Disney Sea and you eat at Magellan's restaurant, the music that you hear, which runs on a continuous loop for many hours a day and generates somewhere in the region of about $35 a year in ASCAP.
Nice.
Yeah. That's me. And they wanted something that was had a very Renaissance feel to it. So that was kind of a natural area for me. And with a certain kind of an attitude to it. And, this is kind of like, what Telemann described as tafel music, table music, restaurant music.
Yeah.
So, but I, basically I just kind of sit down with the guitar and I start finding something melodic and something textural to develop.
Right.
Whether that would be in standard tuning or in DAG-GAD or whatever.
Right.
My most recent piece.
Good, please.
And this one started with the title, which is Grandma Rose's Chicken Pan.
Nice.
Yeah. Because Hope yelled at me because I was in the kitchen and she said, I need a pan. And I pulled out this big blue pan. She said, oh, we can't use that. That's Grandma Rose's chicken pan. You can only use it for chicken. And that just, sounded like a title to me.
Right.
Hang on, let me get it right. I've got a little vamp to start.
I love it.
So, but in the body of that, in the substance of it, it's how does one modify cadences, for example, because the end of the phrase is going to be something cadential,
right?
That kind of style, so. And also, I'm just guitaristically. The old Travis thing of using the thumb.
Right.
And what I love is because the next, the motion towards the cadence is going to the 5 chord, but the first move there is a B7 flat 9.
Exactly.
But most of the time I don't play the chord. I just play the minor ninth. Was it? Yeah, it's a minor 9.
Yeah. that's the great thing about the tune, because you've got all those 5/5/5 things that are
Right,
typical of the genre.
but how they change. It's like
Right.
here,
Yeah, sub
you're
5.
going
Yeah.
to the F, going to the flat 6.
In the middle 8, you've got something very a little humorous key change, which is great. Keep going.
G, F sharp.
And you got
Yeah,
that.
you know, it's 5/5/5/1.
Yeah. Yeah, and there you go. Yeah.
Yeah, but then on the chorus, give it the lift. And at the end,
Sure. Yeah, right.
but playing with that cadential movement is, and how, you know, how many I mean, you think about Baroque music in general is pretty much all 1s and 5s.
Yes.
To, you know, even going into the 19th century, I mean, the primacy of
Yes.
of the dominant tonic relationship. I remember in college I went to a lecture. Do you remember Hans Keller?
I know the name. Yes.
German musicologist who was always on the BBC. And Hans Keller came and gave a lecture on the pleasure and the pain of music. And basically what it boiled down to was the pleasure was the resolution of 5/1. And the pain was the interrupted cadence. It was going from 5 to 6 minor.
Right.
You know, and because it was thwarting your expectations.
Indeed.
The most fascinating thing about that lecture was that he had a piece of chewing gum on the sole of one of his shoes. And as he paced around the stage, it transferred to the stage and then to the other shoe and then back again.
Well, if the shoe fits. But, you know, the interesting thing that I've always thought about that is people who support the concept of modern music always moving forward kind of thing, which is fantastic, and I'm all for it. I've always said that the only reason why, I wouldn't call it painful, I'd call it pleasurable. The only reason why certain music fills you with joy and wonder is the fact that it doesn't do some conventional things. It doesn't resolve in the way that normally you'd expect. But without that expectation, it wouldn't be any fun. It's the expectation that makes modern music great and makes, I mean, everything that all modern composers that you could possibly mention. The only thing that makes it wonderful is the fact that there is something to contrast it with. And I think that that's why it's so.
I think that the recognition of the 5/1 relationship is built into nature. I mean, it's in the harmonic series, you know.
Yes, of course.
Harmonic,
as I say in my lovely book right here, I say that very thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's Pythagoras, you know, it's
exactly.
But what's interesting, I mean, one of the things, you know, being kind of a guitarologist, kind of, you know, and a musicologist by training as well as a musician, but going back historically, how much the fretted instrument family was really responsible for the drive toward chord progressions. You know, in the Renaissance, you've got like the Pasamezzo family, like the Pasamezzo Antico, which is basically the Greensleeves progression. You know? And then, you know, the chorus of Greensleeves is the Romanesca, which is the and that's really where you first get in kind of popular music, as it were, this push towards dominant tonic relationships, because you think about church music of that period and how it's not really driven in the same way. Then you go later in the 16th century and you get the Pasamezzo Moderno, which, hang on, let me just check tuning. Pasamezzo Moderno is also known, the composer Thomas Morley, you know, we're talking about Elizabethan. Thomas Morley described this chord progression as the Gregory Walker. Now, take some explanation.
Yes.
A Gregory was a slang expression for a barbershop. It comes from something Gaelic. And of course, in those days, you didn't just go and get your hair cut. You would also go to a barbershop for some minor surgery.
Yes.
Because they were the only ones that kind of really had sharp, you know, reasonably sharp instruments.
Yeah, they pulled teeth there.
Yeah, they would do that too. But on the walls, there would be instruments. So there'd be like a cittern or a fiddle or something. And if you were waiting, you know, there was no Renaissance People magazine.
Right.
To read, you know, or Play Duke, you know. It was, you know, people would jam, and they would jam on this particular progression. So if you walked into a Gregory, you would hear about the number of tunes through the ages that use that chord progression.
Right.
Including, you know, well, she was just 17.
Yeah.
Same progression, which in turn, I mean, Paul got it from When the Saints Go Marching In, which is, you know, the same thing. Even, you know, You've Got a Friend is that progression.
Right.
And with some modification, so many other tunes. But that goes back to the Renaissance.
Right.
But it was driven by, you know, very much driven by, you know, kind of guitar and lute playing.
Yes.
As was in the Baroque era, there was the folia, which still, I mean, got used. Even Beethoven used the folia, which is the. Just that would be, you know, the ground base for improvisation.
Indeed. I think one of the things that you just pointed up, talking about Mr. McCartney, the similarity between you and him is when, you know, I listen to the Beatles station because I'm in the car and I'm listening to the Beatles station because it's great. And the thing that always amazes me is the breadth of music that is not just the Beatles, but the wide range of music that Paul was influenced by and naturally wrote songs in those styles. And it seems to me that your approach to all these styles is very similar to his, in that you've got these options on the wall, you've got these instruments in the Gregory that you can pull down. You know, and any of them you'll be able to play any of them because you know what they are, and you've had some oral background. I think Paul had that too, so that I would guess that was a nice communication there between you, that he could say, "Oh, let's do it. It's a this thing," and you'd know what he meant.
I mean, it didn't have to be articulated particularly. It just, you know, would flow. But you know what's interesting? I mean, you bring up the Beatles, and you look at how they manifested their influences. You know, and take, for example, She Loves You. I mean, right there in the intro, the fact that you're starting a song on the relative minor,
right,
and then going to the 2 major. You haven't had a 5-1, and of course you end there with the added 6, and then a Chuck Berry lick.
exactly.
And there you got the minor 3, which is very John Lennon.
Yes.
Now you've got the 5, but you don't have a strong cadence. Now we have a Paul move. You know, it's the
Four minor, man. Yeah. 4 minor is the big Beatles.
And back to the Chuck Berry lick.
Right. Yeah. 4 minor is just the big Beatles.
But it comes out, and that's the Paul, really a very Paul characteristic. And you know, it comes out of the Great American Songbook.
Yes, it does very much, because after all, 4 minor is just another, it's a substitute for 5, but a much more emotional one.
Yeah. But John doesn't typically do that. John's chord progressions can be really quite odd.
Yes, indeed.
Really, you know, kind of very left field, and not coming from a necessarily an educated place, but coming from a just, you know, oh, this is cool.
Yes.
When you look at, you know, I Am The Walrus.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, there's an unusual progression indeed.
I do it in Dagad.
Of course you will.
Of course I do. Yeah.
Thank you. Laurence Juber plays the Laurence Juber Martin guitar.
But you know, with I'm the Walrus. Yes, I know why. I mean, you're going from a B to an A to a G.
Yes.
To a D, because you're actually in the key of A.
Eventually.
And then C. Yeah, but it's these kind of like this descending progression.
Yes, indeed.
And there's, you know, and like when you get to
that part.
And I love this.
That's my favorite part of the whole song right there, that progression. Yeah.
With that D sharp against. And it's like you never quite know what key you're in.
No, and that's what's wonderful about it. Yeah. And how much it suits the lyric, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, the lyric is, you know, is pure nonsense.
Yeah, but that's it's that feeling of being not anchored.
But in reality.
Yes, the chord progression, and of course, I gotta say, George Martin's absolutely stunning orchestration of it really creates that whole atmosphere of being unbalanced and in a fantasy world.
Yeah, I can't imagine what the Mike Sam singers said when they walked out of Abbey Road after doing that end section.
Well, I talked to Paul about it briefly, and he said that they were just laughing hysterically, but because they were studios, so they just did what they were told.
Yeah.
And they didn't even think it was that funny. They just thought, well, these people are strange, and we'll do what we're getting paid, so we'll do it.
It was a union date.
Yeah, exactly. Laurence Juber, thank you very much for being a human being and playing that piece of wood there.
Oh, you're very welcome. You know, I mean, I'd happily do this again and talk about the benefits that come with using DAGAT, for example.
Oh, I love that. Great. Anytime you like. I'd be very up for that.
The kind of voicings that come very naturally in that tuning that you just can't get in standard tuning.
Exactly. And I must say that before you started with the DAGAT thing, a lot of your acoustic playing, you had figured out voicings that used open strings already on a standard tuning. And I loved that when you did that. And now, of course, once you got to the different tunings, it went apeshit crazy bonkers driller killer.
The only issue more than anything else is, for example, I have an arrangement of All the Things You Are. Which I do, starting on a D minor.
Right.
But if I'm playing in an ensemble, I'm going to do the regular, starting on the F minor standard tuning version. So there's a lot of tunes I have kind of two versions of. A solo arrangement doesn't necessarily function the same way as an ensemble.
Oh, certainly not. No. And let's do a Dadgad show. I'm very into any guitar nerd kind of shows, and this is definitely going to be one of them. So we'll do that soon.
We'll deep out.
Meanwhile, thanks, and everything is groovy.
Indeed. All right, then.
All right. Thanks a lot, man. Bye-bye. Hi, I'm Richard NILES, here to tell you about my podcast and my YouTube channel, Radio Richard. Now, they say the best things in life are free, but are they really? Let's see now. Friends? Well, how much do you really want to listen to their problems or lend them money? Nature? Well, do you know how much money it costs to maintain a park or save a rainforest? But subscribing to Radio Richard is absolutely free. It costs you nothing. Not only that, we actually pay you. How? With thought-provoking interviews and amazing award-winning artists. Where else can you get my interviews with music icons Barry Manilow, Nile Rodgers of Chic, Michael McDonald, and Richard Carpenter of the Carpenters? So you see, please like, share, and subscribe. You'll help keep this podcast alive and make the world a much more musical place. Radio Richard. It's absolutely free.
Radio Richard.